Welcome to the Hi Fi Mechanik.
Welcome to the Hi Fi Mechanik's LP12 tips. Tip 3 of 25. All about the motor.
In this video, all about the motor, we will be taking you through all aspects of this cheeky chappy, including repairing, cleaning, noise reduction, removal, fitting and setup.
The motor, like the LP12 itself, is deceptively simple. The cheeky little chappy, if not set up correctly, will degrade the overall sound quality, and you don't want that, do you?
One of the areas which certainly can be overlooked at times is a distortion in an area known as the tilt plate on the motor, and this is easily identified by simply removing both tilt screws and then just going down to eye level and then just seeing if the motor pulley is parallel with the surface of the top plate, and if it's not parallel to the top plate, then the likelihood is the tilt plate has been over tightened and distorted the plate shape. So what we do is remove the motor, and then we can then assess how much damage there is, and then we'll look at correcting that damage. The tilt plate is mounted to the body of the motor housing by a method called clinching. This is a little bit like rivets, but the rivets don't actually exist. So it's pressed. The top plate, the tilt plate is actually pressed in place in 3 locations. You could try and drill out the clinching with an oversized steel twist bit, but the danger here is that if you go a little bit too deep, you could actually damage the motor itself, and with an average price of £150, it's probably not worth it, and the results that we can normally achieve just by reshaping it are more than good enough. I'm using a pair of mole grips here just to gently reshape the tilt plate as closely as possible back to being flat. You don't want to be tempted to use a hammer in this case, or anything too heavy tool-wise, because any impacts may damage the obviously the workings of the motor itself. So we just want to gently reshape the tilt plate. We're never going to get it 100% perfectly flat, but it'll be more than good enough. Because you can't get the tilt plate perfectly flat, you might well be tempted to pop a bit of glue in there and leave it overnight, or use VHB, very high bond double-sided tape, and again maybe leave it in a clamp overnight. But rest assured, over the course of months or years, that tilt plate will pull away and go back to not being perfectly level. Just in the same way that a starfish will eventually open up a clam, the tilt plate is constantly putting pressure, pulling away from the top of the motor housing, and therefore they will eventually separate again.
The motor has 4 positions giving 3 possible configurations. Closer to the spindle reduces belt tension, away from the spindle will of course increase the belt's tension, and finally the factory recommended position in the middle, which way round, clockwise or anti-clockwise, doesn't matter.
Once you've decided if you're having the motor clockwise or anti-clockwise, you then just need to tighten up the nuts finger tight, and then just an extra half turn will then be more than enough pressure. It's ridiculously rare to even propose this, but I'm putting it in anyway. It is physically possible to put the motor in the wrong way around. As you can see here, the cables will foul the movements of the sub-chassis. As I say, it's incredibly rare. I bet someone on the planet has got one the wrong way around and they wonder why the suspension's not working properly. But yeah, it's just worth noting. I'm just using some isopropyl alcohol, just pouring it into a cap, and then using cotton buds to remove the rubber deposits. In this particular case, they were incredibly stubborn. It's obviously been on there for a number of years, so I had to admit defeat temporarily and move straight over to Brasso in order to cut through the stubborn rubber deposits. But as you can see, after the course of a bit of time, it came up really nicely, so well worth the effort. I'd normally suggest cleaning the motor fairly early on, as with our example with particularly heavy rubber deposits. They could well be hiding some quite deep scratches, and there's absolutely no point in going through the process of setting up and calibrating the motor and getting it all running perfectly, and then the last thing you do is clean the pulley to then discover that you've got gouges in the surface of the motor pulley, which are then cutting into the belt. We may well decide to make a dedicated short movie just to dealing with deep scratches on the surface of the pulley. As we say, if you do have deep scratches, then it's undoubtedly going to start carving up the belt. So obviously we want to avoid that, but we may well cover that in a specialist video. There are a few things that can actually add noise onto the motor itself. One is the tilt screws may be a little bit loose and therefore rattle away. The spring itself may be twisting within the cap and making noise. There may be a lack of grease on the top of the dome where it's in contact with the base of the motor thrust pad. So there's a few things there that could cause additional problems. Motor noise can be a little bit of a tricky one with the older motor, which is the model which we're concentrating on today. The way in which you would actually judge how noisy the motor is basically just obviously to stand over the deck and listen to it. One technique which I used to use was I would wait until it's in the early hours, so it's really quiet, and I'd stand in the opposite corner of the room and then slowly walk towards the deck and stop it when I felt that I could hear it whirring away. You can use the lid here to actually help you, so the lid will help direct the sound of the motor towards you as you walk towards the deck. The ideal situation, of course, is that you end up standing over the deck and you still can't hear anything, and if that's the case, then the likelihood is your motor is as quiet as it probably can be. If you want to listen to any motor noise with a bit more detail, then obviously you can pick up a stethoscope quite cheaply online, and you can use that then to pop that onto the top plate and listen to the motor noise, and then you can make a decision to make those changes, and then obviously after it's bedded in after a couple of days, then you can then have another listen to it. There is a little word of warning here, in that there are occasions when you may take a chance to make the motor a bit quieter and end up making it noisier. So it is unfortunate. It's just a risk that you have to take yourself. You have to make a call on whether or not you feel that the motor is excessively noisy and therefore warrants some tweaking. So the motor has three possible positions with the factory fitted spring cap assembly. It pushes the motor vertical, so the bushes, the top bushes are in contact. You can physically remove the cap altogether, so then the bushes at the bottom then are in contact. Or another method is floating in the middle, and this often is a good solution, because then the motor isn't actually resting on either the top or the bottom stop, so it is actually floating in, because it's in contact with less surface area, therefore it should be that bit more quieter. So this was a technique which I used to use quite a lot, and I found it quite successful. The quickest change you can make is obviously just to physically remove the motor cap, and then just leave it to run in for a day or two, and then just see if that's quieter than with the motor cap. If it's noisier, then we have to look at using the motor cap in conjunction with maybe tweaking the height of the spring to reduce that motor noise down. If you find that the motor cap keeps popping off, this is often attributed to just grease on the top of the motor cap. So just a little, I'm just using here some methylated spirits, popping it into the cap, and then using a cotton bud, and I'm just cleaning the perimeter, and this will remove any grease. And the same goes for the motor thrust pad itself. Again, if that's popping off, not staying in place, a little bit of degreasing with methylated spirits will do the job nicely. Another option is to add a bit of dampening to the spring itself, which again will reduce certain noises. And for this, I'm just using a new scouring pad. So I'm just using a scalpel here just to cut out a small rectangle of foam, and then twisting that into the spring itself. And then I'm just chopping off the excess and then popping that in. It's always a good idea to obviously put a fresh blob of grease onto the dome and the thrust pad, and then pop it back in and see how it sounds. So the way in which we achieve floating the motor pulley in the middle is by cutting down the spring. Now this really is obviously a bit of trial and error. You have to chop a bit off and then refit it and see then if it's in the correct place. But the thing to remember is that you want to, after each time you cut down the spring, you want to take a pair of snipe nose pliers and bend the bottom of the tail of the spring that you've cut off, so you can then straighten it and make it level, just so when the spring gets refitted into the cap, it's sitting flat on the bottom and therefore is nice and vertical. Now just a little note for you, if you are trying to cut down the spring to float the motor, the amount of tolerance that you're working with is less than 1 mil. Our particular example has a play gap of 0.8 mil, so that's 800 micron. So ideally you want to get the height of the spring sitting in the middle of that area, so about 400 micron. So it's a little bit of trial and error, but if you find that you cut the spring down a little bit too much, then you can always re-stretch the spring if you're careful. Again, try and be cautious how much you do that. You don't want to again overcook it, but it can be done. You just have to be patient and chop off a bit at a time and you'll be fine. So this is the final middle floating position that we've achieved by cutting our spring down, and just using a cotton bud here, you can see if I apply pressure from the top down, it springs back up, but equally if I move the cotton bud underneath, I also have enough play vertically, so the motor is indeed right in the middle position, and this in theory should be its quietest position.
There are 3 methods available to judge the speed: a stroboscope disc with a light or a phone app, or your ears. We're becoming phone app converts, mainly because it gives a more accurate digital measurement rather than judging if a line is slowly moving forwards or backwards.
setting the motor speed is nice and straightforward. We just use one screw initially, which we put in the top. We screw it up and down until we achieve the correct speed by trial and error. And then once we've achieved the correct speed, we then dial it back just a quarter of a turn. Then we take our second screw, pop that in until it's just touching the tilt plate, and then we dial that down a quarter of a turn, and then our speed is set. Setting up the motor is a little bit trial and error because you're constantly taking the platter off, making an adjustment and then putting the platter back on. But it shouldn't take all that long to set up, and you tend to get into a little bit of a routine with it all. It was said that once the belt kicks down and touches the belt guide, it then discharged the deck from static. But of course, I was never really convinced by this statement, mainly because of course it depended just how conductive the rubber drive belt actually was. And later on, the material of the belt guide was changed from aluminium to plastic, and that sort of then obviously killed that theory anyway. So the belt guide is really there just to keep the belt from coming off the pulley. You often see phone apps not being really used in the correct place. A lot of people just put the phone right towards the tip of the spindle and let it rotate round. And for a non-suspended sub-chassis, that's fine, of course, because the deck is solid. But on a floating sub-chassis system, the unevenness of the weight of the phone will cause the wow and flutter to be worse than it really is. So what we do in this case is we simply use a bit of polystyrene packaging or a couple of sheets of cardboard and pierce the middle with a hole, pop it over the spindle, and then you can rest the phone right in the middle, so then the weight is evenly distributed and your readings will be that bit more accurate. If you're blessed or cursed with perfect pitch, then you can of course just listen to the deck and set the speed according to how you believe it should be correct. A nice example of this actually is our company attended the Harrogate music show, where a lot of manufacturers demonstrate their products in hotel rooms and what have you. And A-B comparisons were going on left, right and centre, and in this particular room me and my colleagues were sitting down and they were saying, oh, which is the Linn Sondek and which isn't. So they were both behind this curtain and the music played on one and the music played on both, and then the question was asked to the audience, which is which, and my colleague said the first one is the Linn Sondek, the second deck is the other deck, and he said, and by the way, the Linn Sondek is running slow. They all looked at each other and put a stroboscope on and checked the speed, and indeed it was running a tad slow, which just goes to show obviously some people can obviously hear when a deck is running slow. I'm personally not able to do that. My little forte is being able to tell when speakers are out of phase, but that's a story for another day. If your deck is taking longer than say 10 seconds to get up to speed, then it may well be suffering from torque issues. So another quick test that you can do is you can pop the outer platter off, remove the belt, and just rest your finger on the top of the motor pulley while it's revolving. And if under a little bit of pressure it then suddenly stops and starts juddering, then that's a torque issue, and it's highly likely to be most likely caused by the power supply rather than the motor itself. So you would have to seek out an electronic expert to help you have that problem fixed.
I really appreciate you watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It's completely free to do so. Thank you again for watching.
Disclaimer: these videos and tips are created for information only and represent the personal opinions, information and procedures of the Hi Fi Mechanic. The Hi Fi Mechanic does not accept any responsibility including damage, loss, injury or death as a result of undertaking your own tests, upgrades or enhancements. We strongly recommend contacting your local dealer for a professional service.